That's why
So
Posner's arguments are actually really interesting in Not a Suicide Pact. I haven't come to a final conclusion on them, but it was just such an interesting read. I was working through it recently, and I was just like, this is an interesting argument about what it means when a president decides to break laws. Skimming money off the top, like that's not what I'm talking about. It's like saying, okay,
mhm,
we're going to, you know, step back from an agreement we made temporarily because we need
mhm,
to, transgress a boundary that we previously agreed upon, right? Because that's the fundamental point of emergency powers is that your system didn't plan for these scenarios, so you need to have a different type of power to do what you need to do. I mean, this is the conundrum of emergency. It's it defies your structure. So, for example, um, Russia invades Ukraine, full invasion. Ukraine declares martial law. Why? Because it puts in place a range of powers that are needed to keep the society coherent. Now, you can't anticipate on day one that we're now in the fifth year of this thing, but we're now in the fifth year of this thing. I mean, obviously, this goes well before 2022, but like I'm talking about since martial law was declared. Um, you have a David versus Goliath situation with this invasion. Um, the topic of elections in Ukraine is obviously a hot button issue that you know Putin pushes into the narrative sphere, and which U.S. president has run with a couple of times. Um, but you start asking yourself, like Howard, how would you do an election when you have 7 million people outside the country and how many under occupation? And so the scenarios that envision use of these powers and the actual instances we can point to show just how complex these are because legal discussions like we're having, are in a box. They're in a constrained box with rules. And what we're talking about is a scenario that's like ruleless. So you have a ruleless scenario that's put into a box with rules. So I think you're just inherently challenged with this. These kinds of outcomes that are just going to be completely um, impossible to clearly delineate and articulate and say this was right, this was wrong. Like this has to like so you need the arbiter, you need the Supreme Court to come in and say, okay, look, we're making a decision based on the text. It's a textual interpretation, and there's no use of tariffs here, so no. You know, theoretically, you know, if there's an emergency, if there was a legitimate emergency, why would the Supreme Court even restrain it in that manner, right? In this case, this is a choice. It's not an emergency. It's a choice of something that has been in place for a long time. The imbalances that were described that support have been in place for a long time. So there's no urgency, but you get my point.